You know, sometimes you see something or read something and you just want to stick a pencil in your ear directly afterwards. And it's so, you just get depressed. I don't know. Look, the internet is truly bringing the worst out of us. In fact, we have a great question to get into here, and it might, because it's such a big conversation, it might end up taking up the whole show. And it's a conversation that or a question that I had teased last week. It's not the pet one. We'll get into the ethics of pets another time, maybe next week, unless we can get to it at the end of this week. But I don't think so. But by the way, welcome to your Wednesday Zomia ONE Underground only Q&A. The Golden Stallion, the man of tomorrow, Saab Zoo, the radar, radio star, here for you. But this, if you'll indulge me for a few minutes to talk about the entertainment industry. No, I'm not going to say all entertainment's dead. I'm not going to go down that road. Okay. But if you don't want to hear me talk about it for a few minutes, just skip ahead, I don't know, 5-10 minutes or something, and you'll find where I start getting into the question for this week from a great Sovereign Tech listener, longtime Sovereign Tech listener, and just tremendous supporter of the show. But I saw a tweet today. And, we shouldn't get too bothered about tweets because they are as ephemeral as, the wind passing by. I mean, it's they're so fucking meaningless. But it just speaks to the people we have to deal with today. The people that Hollywood or the entertainment industry are the ones they're really making all of this shit for. And it's something I really have to accept. And I don't know if I've talked about this recently. Maybe I have. And it's something that I guess we all, to some degree, have to accept. And if you're a Stoic, you'd really have to accept it, I guess. But, well, anyway, we'll talk about Stoics here in a few minutes. But we have to accept that the entertainment being made today isn't for us, or at the very least, it's not for me. Maybe it's for you, but it's not for me. And my good man, Rob, he, I think he would say the same. In fact, he had some very strong words to share with me about Star Trek, or modern or new Trek, as he called it, NU Trek, kind of like how I've constantly ripped on new BSG, sort of for similar reasons. And I don't think this is a demographic thing. I really don't, because it's unavoidable now that, they're coming right out and admitting, say with Star Trek, say with Picard or Discovery, that, yeah, this is a different tone than classic Trek. Okay. So don't say it's because I'm old or because, I'm not 25. Say that we're going forward with a different tone and a different tack. Okay. All right. Like there you go. That's what you're doing. Just don't pretend, don't try to say, oh, you just don't like it because you're old. No. If you're going with a different tone than what I usually care for in my entertainment, then it's not for me. But that's the thing we kind of have to accept, right? Is that this stuff isn't made for me. In fact, something else that, I don't want to talk about it here. I want to save it for an episode of TIE Fighter Renegades, which episodes of that are coming, folks. Don't worry. Just Rob and I, we both have crazy schedules, quite frankly. But I heard a review kind of ahead of time, because this isn't coming out for a couple more weeks. But I heard a review for the novelization of The Rise of Skywalker for, episode 9 of Star Wars, which I have been greatly anticipating, I will admit. And what I expected is in it. Of course, it's called the expanded edition, right? And basically, and I won't give anything away right now, it doesn't matter if I did, but basically it expands upon a lot of the questions that people had in the film. Like, where did the Sith Eternal Army come from? Where did all this crap come from? What does Palpatine mean by all of the Sith, and blah, 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 and all kinds of things. So I can say for certain now, based upon people who have read it, yeah, it does expand and it does give answers to a lot of these things. Now, I'll be the first to admit some of these answers I really don't like. But overall, it does sound like something that I will appreciate more than the actual movie itself, which was also the case of The Last Jedi. I thought the novel was great. In fact, the novel was fantastic compared to the film. And maybe when I actually read and I get the flow of the novelization for Rise of Skywalker, maybe I'll feel the same way. We're like, oh no, the book is good. It's just the movies are shit. You know what I mean? I'm totally open to that. But ultimately, the thing I need to, or I don't need to accept it, but the thing because I can do something about it. But the thing that I need to accept is that, yeah, the stuff this isn't made for me. In fact, it was interesting during this review. So for clarity, and we'll get to the tweet in a second here. It was Rebel Force Radio, where Jimmy Mack had read the book ahead of time and he was reviewing it, and he was talking to another guy who, they were kind of having a back and forth on it. And they were, so towards the end of it, it was funny. Towards the end of it, the guy who's doing the podcast with Jimmy Mack says, do you think that Star Wars fans are as passionate? Like he was saying, he says, with the old EU, because right now with Star Wars, you have a new canon, and most of the classic Star Wars books, or, most of the Star Wars books that a lot of people would still talk about to this day, they're not canon anymore, right? Like they don't, yeah, okay, they're out there, but they're called legends and they're not part of it. But he was asking, he says, a lot of people were really passionate about characters like Mara Jade, and all these other people from the old EU. And he asked Jimmy Mack straight up, and you got to understand, Rebel Force Radio is probably the biggest Star Wars podcast in the world. Probably. In fact, I think part of the reason that Lucasfilm doesn't actually do a Star Wars podcast, because like CBS has a Star Trek podcast, or they have podcasts of a type, and they have had them. But anyway, part of the reason I think that Lucasfilm or Disney doesn't bother is because, you already have these, very entrenched podcasts for Star Wars, and it's better that they just deal with them. And clearly they are dealing with them, right? Because if you're getting a copy of the novelization for Rise of Skywalker 2 weeks early, you're clearly in bed with Disney in some form or fashion, right? And I'm not saying that to insult Rebel Force Radio necessarily. I'm just saying that there it is. I think Jimmy Mack's a funny guy, and I really appreciated his review of the novelization, and a lot of the hard work that he put into it. But anyway, the guy who's doing it with Jimmy Mack says at the end, it's like, are people, do you think they're as passionate about like these books about the new canon as they were with the old EU? And Jimmy Mack, who usually is a very positive guy. In fact, even in this podcast, he defends Reylos, which I can't do for a second, but Jimmy Mack just comes right and says, oh, no. No, he says, no way. He says, people aren't nearly as passionate about these books as they were about the old EU. And I think he's right. Like I was really, I was shocked, frankly, to hear him admit that. And it's a question I've never even really bothered to ask, like people who, but then see, that's the other part of this too, is I don't know that many people who read every fucking Star Wars book that comes out the way that I do, like I really don't know that many people, but I guess Jimmy Mack, who would encounter those kinds of people because they would be the people that would be predispositioned to listen to a Star Wars podcast like Rebel Force Radio, I imagine he would encounter those people more, and he's probably heard from them that no, they don't care as much about the books now as they did back in the 90s, right? Or even through some of the aughts. Which, there's a conversation, and Rob and I are really the ones that should have it. I don't need to have it on my own. There needs to be a conversation around that, around what, the reasons why perhaps. And is it just the fact that, well, there were better authors back then? It's not like there weren't stinkers in the old EU. Fuck, he who will not be named, KJA, but anyway, that itself speaks to, I think, this notion that I mentioned where, look, this stuff just isn't being made for us. Okay. And so then who is it being made for? Well, here's the thing. And you know what? Like, even that point ultimately doesn't matter. And I'm going to explain why. Here's this tweet that I saw today. And this tweet was made at 8:26 Eastern time on March 4th, 2020. Okay. For perspective. Here we go. Now, this is coming from it's the name of the person. It's a gal, or someone that identifies as a gal, has a Starfleet uniform on. Okay, in their profile pic on Twitter, and their handle is 24-year-old Trekkie. Okay, so that gives us some idea of the demographic we're dealing with here. And this gal has quite a few thousand followers actually on. Somewhere around 7,000 or 8,000 followers on Twitter, which, that's nothing to sneeze at. That's pretty good. And apparently she hosts varying, like Star Trek podcasts. Okay. So not your, perhaps at least not a dummy, somebody who has some, I wouldn't call them, say that they have sway, but they have some stroke. How about that? In this whole fandom thing anyway. And so here's what 24-year-old Trekkie, here's what she had to say in her tweet. Not every Star Trek series might be your, and she puts your in capitals, in caps, might not be, or not every Star Trek series might be your Star Trek, but they are all still Star Trek. Now, I think that is the most preposterous fucking statement. Not the most preposterous fucking statement I've ever heard, but perhaps in reference to modern Star Trek fandom. Yes. This is the people that we're dealing with. Let's take a minute to soak in what this means. So because a fucking mega corporation bought the rights for Star Trek, or acquired the company that held the rights for Star Trek, however that goes down, because CBS decides to put the two words Star Trek in front of something, that automatically makes it part of the zeitgeist that is, the Star Trek franchise as we've understood it for decades. No. Okay, I guess that it's something with the name Star Trek, but does it make it what Star Trek is or was? No. Not even close. A lot of people are bringing up right now because, there's such a division in fandom with Discovery and even Picard for that matter. A lot of people are bringing up, well, in 87, there was a lot of people that didn't like Star Trek: The Next Generation either. Yeah, I know, I was there. I'm aware that was true. Okay. But people were willing to give TNG a chance. Why? Because the guy, the person, the guy, the brains, the creator behind Star Trek, it was something he was putting out there to you. Okay. This statement made by 24-year-old Trekkie, who I guess is basically just, he more or less is just a mindless lackey for mega corporations. If she had said something to the effect of, not every Star Trek series might be your Star Trek, but they are all still Star Trek because Gene Roddenberry makes them. If she said that, okay, then that statement wouldn't be ridiculous, right? But that's the rub. And understand, as we've talked about in certain episodes lately, a hard truth that I, really came to only realize. I've realized so much about Star Trek, or learned so much about Star Trek and Gene Roddenberry, just, in the past year, frankly. You got to understand that Gene Roddenberry, all told, had control of maybe, had control of the first two seasons, more or less, of the original series. He left for the third. And he had control of The Next Generation for maybe the first two seasons. Of course, then he died. And he had control of Star Trek: The Motion Picture. That's it. Everything else was basically not Gene's Star Trek. Now, Rick Berman, and I believe him, Rick Berman would come out after the fact and basically, would come out and say later on, he's like, look, I was, the studios were trying to push Gene out of the Next Generation. I was trying to protect Gene. And we know that there were scripts for season 2 when Gene was still in charge. There were scripts for season 2 that had to do with homosexuality and other things that the studio would not allow they wouldn't allow him to go through. Okay. So, even if you think that that Star Trek was Gene Roddenberry's vision, Gene Roddenberry didn't get to get his vision past the mega corporations, right? Not all the time. He had to sneak it in. That's why he was doing science fiction in the first place. Okay. And I mean, we could talk forever about this. There's so much to get into, that we could get into with this. But understand that, Rick Berman at the very least was like, well, I tried to keep Gene's vision going. And I think he genuinely tried. I'll say that. I think he really, really tried to keep Gene's vision alive to some degree. And at the time, at least, I can remember actually when The Next Generation was ending, where Jonathan Frakes was talking about Gene Roddenberry, quote unquote, Gene Roddenberry's vision, the hopeful vision for the future, which clearly Discovery and Picard does not have. But how important that was to him and how they were trying to keep it going. Now you could say Deep Space Nine didn't have it, but I don't agree with that. I mean, Deep Space Nine tried to be a little more realistic in that all the technology doesn't always work. That's basically what Ira Stephen Bear would say. But absolutely, Deep Space Nine was still espousing, one of the greatest quotes from Star Trek ever was from The Emissary, where Sisko says, we're not here to conquer you. We're just here to coexist and learn. Fuck yeah, man. That's Gene Roddenberry stuff, to the hilt. But I guess then it becomes a question, and this is a question that needs to get asked right now. And look, this is happening again with Star Wars. Frankly, I don't watch modern Doctor Who, but I've heard that some kind of crap happened with a time child or something, and Doctor Who fans are flipping the fuck out about it because it's retconning or screwing with everything that they've known previously about Doctor Who. This is something that everything's going through. Okay, where like it's pretty clear, I don't know, there's some kind of agenda happening where I guess maybe the studios are trying to reach different audiences and they're not realizing that, like I hear the argument that Picard in fact, Michael Chabon, the writer of Star Trek Picard has said as much, that they're trying to, like, they have to be careful in writing things so that, it's not just for fandom. Okay. Like he's more or less said that. But then I don't think that Picard as a show is compelling enough to bring, or Discovery is compelling enough, and putting it on CBS All Access sure as hell is one hell of a barrier to bring in new people. Like I don't get that mindset. Star Trek appealed to a certain type of person. You could say The Next Generation kind of appealed to a broader audience and all that. But part of that was because you actually because it was weak, it was episodic, and it wasn't something where, every episode you had to see every episode. I think that's why a lot of people could jump in on it. And so there's a lot of ironies there. But my point is to say is that, so we have to ask ourselves, what is Star Trek? Is Star Trek Roddenberry's vision, or it is Star Trek whatever gets the words Star Trek put in front of whoever happens to own the rights to it? If your answer is that it's Roddenberry's vision, then New Trek, that ain't Star Trek. Okay. And anything, in fact, even actually Gene Roddenberry would come out and say that he didn't even think the animated series was that good, which, look, I like the animated series, so it's not like I agree with Roddenberry all the time. I think the animated series is great for what it is. Okay, but he didn't think that was that should be considered canon. CBS thinks differently. So CBS clearly will disagree, as desired, with Gene Roddenberry. And actually, again, we've known that Paramount and whoever was owning Star Trek at the time while Gene Roddenberry was alive was already disagreeing with anything that Gene Roddenberry, or with a lot of what Gene Roddenberry wanted or was doing. We talked recently about how Gene Roddenberry thought that Star Trek II, some of the actions of Kirk in that were absolutely deplorable, and he thought it was ridiculous. But that's considered to be the best Star Trek ever, by a lot of people's ranking. Certainly as far as movies go. So you got to ask yourself, what is Star Trek? Okay. And if you just think Star Trek is whatever gets, again, those words put in front of it by whatever entity owns it legally. Okay. Well then, sure. Picard is Star Trek. Everything else is Star Trek. But then, do you, and what, you just watch it because, or you just stand by it and roll with the punches because some fucking mega corporation says so? This is what's so depressing about this tweet, is that basically there are fans out there who will ultimately just roll with the punches on anything happening with their favorite franchise simply because some idiot. There's a great story. I actually watched an interview with Brandon Braga and Rick Berman recently. I actually used to consider Brandon a friend at one point. We'd see each other so much and everything. Anyway, they were doing an interview together, and like a sit down kind of fireside chat. It was really great. And Rick Berman is talking about it. And you understand, Rick Berman was running Star Trek for like 20 years. They were talking about Enterprise, because this is on the Enterprise Blu-ray set. And in it, he's talking about how while they were filming, I don't know, whatever it was, the third season, I think, of Enterprise, maybe it was the second season of Enterprise, a new executive team had moved in to, I guess at the time that would have been like CBS or Viacom, CBS Paramount. And they were telling them the story idea that they had for Enterprise. And they kept talking about the ship's hull, HULL. And when they got to the end of the conversation, the studio head said, "Yeah, that all sounds pretty interesting, but what's a hull?" And Rick Berman says, he's like, "Yeah," he says, "pretty much when we had that meeting," he says, "that's when I knew it was over. Like that this was going to get canceled sooner or later, because when that's the thing. If Star Trek is such a big deal to you, such a moneymaker, and blah 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 blah, like CBS would like to claim now, you'd think the people that move in would have some idea." Would have, like every episode of Star Trek basically references the hull. Like, I don't know how you don't know that, this is your job. You're running the studio. You're running a fucking multi-billion-dollar studio. Maybe you should have some idea about your biggest franchises and how they operate. I guess not. But regardless of that, and I apologize because I'm spending way more time talking about this than I wanted to. Okay. But this idea that, you just need to fucking, shut up and like it. Okay. Because, hey, the studio heads at CBS, which, I'm sure we can relate to them on a human level. The studio heads at CBS, they said this is Star Trek. So motherfucker, this is Star Trek. You sit down and shut your mouth. I'm sorry. It's not like your old Star Trek, but this is Star Trek. Fuck you, 24-year-old Trekkie. Like, are you kidding me? We're just going to bow down to whatever the mega corporations fucking tell us. Kiss my ass. Fine. Legally, it's Star Trek. Sure. It's one interpretation, I guess, of Star Trek, but no, baby, this is not Star Trek. Give me a break. Just like new BSG, that's not Battlestar Galactica. At least that's a lot more honest about the fact that it isn't. You put Glenn Larson in there? Okay, then let's talk turkey. Then, all right, we'll discuss whether or not that. This lack of respect for the creator is, and I don't mean God. I just mean for, whoever is the creator of such content. Man, that's fucking annoying, it really is. It really, really is. I love the guy, the author of The Witcher. They're asking you, Andre, whatever his name is. They're like, they did an interview with him. They're like, well, how do you feel about the games? or about the video games of The Witcher, which are great games, by the way. I mean, I'll admit that. Or how do you feel about the Netflix series? He's like, yeah, it's just like read books. That's all he said was, he's like, I'll read books. You can't control that guy. And he's just like, no, he says, that's not The Witcher. Shut up. You know what? Fine. Like I can still enjoy the games, but then also at the same time I can say, okay, well, this isn't what the creator's vision, and we can just go forward, but that, yeah, I don't get it. I don't fucking get it. All right. I guess, really that's one thing I'll agree with the Raylos on. Like the Raylos think that, they want to come out and say, oh no, this is what Star Wars should be. This is blah, blah, blah. Like they act like they own it. You know what? Go ahead, guys, gals, Z's, you go ahead. You own Star Wars and you write it the way you want it. You make your little fan movies and you have a great time with it. You've at the very least got my support in that. Okay. Again, where I disagree with the Raylos is that, okay, the people that actually like wrote the movie, right? No, that's not there. like what you're saying is supposed to be there isn't there. And so to argue that like the idea of telling J.J. Abrams or whoever like even created the characters of Kylo and Rey to tell them what they need to do with their characters, that's outrageous. All right. That'd be like telling Frank Herbert to change Dune Messiah. Like, sorry, that ain't happening. Okay. I mean, and I get just as mad at J.J. Abrams for saying, oh yeah, we're not going to include midichlorians. Wait, what? Because you don't like them? Because you don't think the Force should be interpreted that way? Who the fuck are you? To do that sort of thing, right? I mean, because then, I mean, it's a matter of degrees with creators, but anyway, the people who are complaining that this doesn't like today, what's coming out, that this doesn't feel like Star Trek. They are people who are clearly into Roddenberry's vision. And they're saying this doesn't match up with Roddenberry's vision. They are not wrong. So don't go around saying that. Anyway, that's enough. I have talked about this for far too long. I want to talk about Stoicism because bottom line, the entertainment industry totally fucked. So, okay. There, I did say it. I'm sorry. All right. Let's get into the question here. Let's see. A few episodes back, this was actually asked in the Sovereign Tech Telegram group. A few episodes back, you described Stoicism as a system of control. With its continued popularity amongst a certain population, I wonder who he means by that, but anyway, no, I think I know who he means. I think it's important to explore this more. I have my own reasons for thinking along similar lines, but I'd like to know if I'm missing anything. You've talked about it a bit in the past, but could you expand on your own reasoning behind your comment? I will gladly expand upon that. And let's just get right into it. So the most important thing, and I'm sure I know this emailer is a smart guy, and I love him. And yeah, so a lot of what I might say, I'm sure he already knows. But for everybody else out there, some explanation is in order. So the first thing to understand about Stoicism and about this population that very much ascribes to it. And it is annoying. I mean, I'll just say it outright. Like I have a bias. I am so annoyed by modern Stoics, as they are called. And we'll explain what that means in a second. Just like what is it? Fire movement, right? Meaning, I don't know, retire. The RE means retire early. These people, you got to be a Stoic to be into that shit. And that's, or financial, what is it? Financially independent, retire early, something like that. And it's just that I see people using that hashtag or whatever, and I go blank. Anyway, so what does it do to your happiness? But then that's kind of at the crux of this. So you got to understand something. Now, I encountered, when I moved to New Hampshire 8 years ago, I encountered a lot of people who were really into Stoicism, and I was a little taken aback by that. Like I was amazed at just how popular it was. And I instantly would, because when you get to New Hampshire, there like you feel some passion around having like some of these. You get to have conversations with other libertarians, say, or anarchists or whatever, that you were not able to have where you lived previously. And so it's very exciting, and you get to get into these conversations. And some of these, admittedly, in fact, I could think of a couple where there were downright arguments about Stoicism. And I'm like, wait, yeah, but what about this? What about this? Now, the amazing thing that would happen when I would argue against Stoicism is that, and I would quote major Stoics, Seneca, Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius, go down the list of them. Okay. I would quote these people. And basically the person I was arguing with would say, oh, I didn't know they said that. And that would be the response most of the time. And so here's the key thing to understand about Stoicism today. Stoicism today is, it's related, but it is not the Stoicism of yesteryear, right? Like, it's nice that Ryan Holiday, who's the person that is really instrumental in making Stoicism a thing again, I think. Ryan Holiday might quote, Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, or Epictetus or whatever, but he's very selective in what he's quoting from them. Okay, like very selective. And I noticed that he's not often necessarily recommending people read classic Stoic texts. I'm sure he wouldn't stop you, but he's not exactly, most of the time what I see from him, he's not really recommending you go and do that. Thing is, if you go and do that, you're going to realize, wow, the Stoics were wrong about that. They were wrong about that. They were wrong about that. And you're going to end up with a pretty lengthy list of shit they were wrong about. Now, you can argue that, well, like any philosophy, it evolves, right? It evolves, in time and gets more applied to the time that it finds itself in, right? And so maybe there are some changes to be made. And while I think that's a fairly accurate thing to say, just like egoism is not, like if egoism was just The Ego in Its Own, the book by Max Stirner, and it was just Max Stirner's thoughts, there are things within The Ego in Its Own that we now know are wrong, where, Max Stirner says, where he makes comments about different races of people that are completely inaccurate and that come off as racist today. Now, at the time, that was just the scientific opinion, or anyway, it was the high science of his day. Okay. But today we know better. And so we're not going to go code and rule with what gets said in, with everything that gets said in any book. Okay. As we learn more scientifically or whatever other reason, things evolve. So that's true that philosophies can evolve. So I don't expect modern Stoicism to necessarily, play along perfectly and, toe the line perfectly with ancient Stoicism or original Stoicism. But that leads into my first issue with Stoicism. Okay. Modern or ancient. But I want to just make it clear again, understand that when you engage somebody who claims to be a Stoic today, there's a very good chance that they're basically just basing it off of, Ryan Holiday's work, right? Like The Daily Stoic, or, oh man, the book that's so horrible, Ego is the Enemy. Fucking hate that book. I guess another quick thing to mention, understand that, there's often this, well, usually you'll get like, there's this triad of competing philosophies, right? Which interestingly seems to happen, or at least that's the way a lot of times this stuff will get written down. For example, in Judaism, around the same time that Stoicism was popular, in Judaism, you had three different Jewish groups. There were more than that, but for some reason we always think about the big three, right? We think about the Sadducees, the Pharisees, and the Essenes, that were all different interpretations of Torah, or practiced different interpretations of Torah and of, Jewishness, as it were. At the time in Greece, when this was becoming a thing, 300 BCE, around there, going forward, you would have three major groups as well. You would have the Stoics, you would have the Epicureans, or the hedonists, okay, which again, that term gets very confused. Talk about confusions, because hedonism does not mean excessive self-indulgence. That's not what that means at all. Certainly not in the Epicurean interpretation of the word hedonism. But you had the Stoics, you had the hedonists or Epicureans, and then you had the Cynics, right? You had those were kind of the big three at the time. And often they get compared against each other. And really the main two that people look at are the Epicureans versus the Stoics, right? These were like the two competing philosophies. It's important to understand that there are a lot of things that if you put if you did a Venn diagram of Stoicism and Epicureanism, there's actually a lot of points where those two circles would join, would flow into each other. There are points where they very much agree. Seneca, okay, one of the top Stoics himself, Seneca would often quote in his letters, he would quote Epicurus very, very favorably. Okay. So there's points where they agree, right? And that's, it's not like they are 100% diametrically opposed. Okay, there are a lot of things within Stoicism and within Epicureanism, or between Stoicism and hedonism that, again, they don't disagree on. There's plenty that they do disagree on. There is more that they disagree on than they agree on, but there's also some very key things that they do agree on. Okay, so we got to make sure that that's known. Anyway, the point I wanted to get to is that what I was leading into here, okay? Understand that modern Stoics probably, you are dealing with, if you are wanting to engage them, and you do so by reading, Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, and Seneca in a very complete way, probably the person's not going to know what you're talking about, okay? Again, they're really only going to know Ryan Holiday's work, most likely, or what he does with the Daily Stoic or whatever. But whether you're dealing with somebody who has knowledge of ancient Stoicism, or if they're just a modern, Ryan Holiday Stoic or Tim Ferriss kind of Stoic, doesn't really matter, because the thing that modern Stoics will, if you actually engage them, if they have knowledge of ancient Stoicism, they will admit they don't agree with this, what I'm about to tell you. But what they are missing in not agreeing with this is that regardless if they agree with it or not, it is a foundational axiom of their philosophy. Okay. And maybe you can make the argument that they're right for the wrong reasons, but I would say no. If your foundational, one of the foundational precepts of your philosophy is off, you have to question the whole thing. And Stoicism doesn't make sense without this foundational precept. And the foundational precept is fate, is that there is a natural order, right? Because that's what Stoicism's all about, right? Is that virtue is the highest good. Virtue is the goal for human life. Okay. Living a virtuous life. As to where with an with Epicurus or Epicureans or hedonists, happiness is the meaning of life, is the ultimate goal. There's a difference there. Virtue and happiness are not the same thing. Okay. But that, for Stoics, you live in accordance with nature. But here's the thing. So this idea of nature, or you could say that you live in accordance with God, right? Like I think it's Epictetus would basically say, like, you are an appendage of Zeus. Who are you to argue with Zeus? Right? Which that should rub everybody wrong instantaneously. But regardless, the idea is that nature is on a course that is ultimately good. No matter what happens, no matter if your loved one dies, or if a whole city burns down, or COVID-19 goes wild, or whatever. Okay, whatever happens, it is all leading ultimately to something good for the universe at large. Okay. And so this is the absolute core of Stoicism. And the amount of faith, again, faith is a lack of evidence, belief without evidence. The amount of faith it takes to believe that is astounding to me. Now, like I said, modern Stoics, if you talk to them about that, they'll say, well, I don't believe that. Okay, then I got you. You don't believe that, but everything that you believe crops out of that notion. Because if you are going to say amore fati, right, meaning that whatever fate throws at you, you love. Okay. Again, if that city burns down, you love it. If you catch COVID-19, you love it. If you accept it. And this is coming, that what I'm saying there comes right out of Ryan Holiday. That is modern Stoic responses. Okay. And I mean, I could spend time on each of these concepts like amor fati or memento mori, right? Which memento mori is that, we're all going to die, right? Saying like, don't worry about what happens. It's not important because guess what? We're all going to die. I have huge problems with that, but understand that those statements are appeals not only to nature, because you could argue that, all right, it's natural for us to die. Okay. As it stands. Sure. You could argue that there's that appeal to nature in it, which can be fallacious. And I would say in this case is, but the idea that you just love it because, why love it? What? Because you can't control it. So you should love it. That's outrageous. That's an outrageous statement that you should just take it when the bully beats you. And you are not strong enough to fight back, that somehow you should just like love that. The fuck I will. I'll get my ass in the goddamn gym and I'll get ready to kick the shit out of it. Well, or at the very least, I will lend the eye a terrible aspect. How about that? To where they are not going to want to fuck with me. That is, oh, no. You want your problems with Stoicism? I mean, here's, again, so, all right, we got to kind of bring this in. Problem one is that no, we know, and even the modern Stoics admit it, that no, the universe does not care. The universe is not heading towards some kind of ultimate good. In fact, with entropy, it's going quite the opposite direction. Okay? Give me a break. But the idea of why you should love what happens to you that you cannot control. Okay. Kind of like Marcus Aurelius says, you just, the fire, what is Aurelius? What does Marcus say? Like something to the effect of, the fire burns brightly regardless of what happens to it. The idea that you should love whatever happens to you and just fucking deal with it and live with it. The only way that makes sense is if you have the faith, because you sure as fuck don't have the evidence, is if you have the faith to believe, if you believe that this is all ultimately going to end up for the good. And I mean, yeah, there's statements like everything happens for a reason, sure. But that statement is not Stoic. That statement doesn't, because Stoics would preclude everything happens for a reason that is good. That's the Stoic version of that statement. No, there's no reason that to suggest, I mean, does everything happen for a reason? I mean, we could get into an interesting metaphysical, conversation around that concept. Okay. But there's no conversation to be had around the idea that everything happens to the good. No. I mean, that's like saying, if you're a trans person, well, you know what? Yeah, I know your coworker was shitty to you, but just deal with it. No, don't deal with it. Do something about it. Problem one. So again, like you see, I get it that modern Stoics do not believe that everything happens, like according to nature and that it is all going to lead to an ultimate good. Okay. Ryan Holiday probably doesn't believe that, but Ryan Holiday or modern Stoics still push the concept of amor fati, and that only makes sense if you believe that there is a design, that fate is leading to an ultimate good, right? That's crazy. I mean, run it by me, folks. If you're a Stoic, I mean, to explain it to me how, oh no, this is okay. I mean, are you going to say it's because of perception, right? That, well, I can perceive anything to actually be in my favor, that my perception controls this and I don't control the outcome. I guess you could say that and you could go forward through life like that, but talk about a victim. That's one hell of a victim mentality you've got there. Way to go. I mean, I've got more to break down here as far as Stoic ideas, because this isn't the only thing that there's an issue with. Okay. But you can see why Christians adopted Stoicism. You can see why militaries, why soldiers adopt Stoicism, right? Because they're constantly having to deal with shit. And there is the belief for the soldier that, well, this is to protect my country, so there is an ultimate good. Or for the Christian, it's, well, I'm going to go to heaven, so none of this really matters. And, I'm going to die someday, but I'm going to go to heaven. So, ultimately there is this good. And that's why these things become acceptable to the, to those kinds of groups. I would argue the reason why Stoicism is so popular with a lot of libertarians and maybe even anarchists, even though I think that they are absolutely antithetical, anarchism and Stoicism do not meld. Okay. I would argue that the reason probably libertarians are into it is because libertarians are really big on Tansfall, right? There's no such thing as a free lunch. And so they want to tell all the fucking poor people, hey, fucking deal with it, asshole. You're going to have to eat shit if you want to make it somewhere in this world. And wow, man, your level of empathy is, that is a power level of 9,000 right there. Way to go, Jack. I think that's why they're so into Stoicism. It's not like they're still not activists and whatever and trying to make some kind of change in the world. Now, that leads into the next big problem here, and one that I will quote directly from Ryan Holiday and his interpretation of modern Stoicism. Okay, but part of me, and I'm not saying that's all libertarians, give me a break, relax. You don't have to cancel your patronage, but I think for a lot of libertarians, they are into Stoicism because they basically want, all these people that they think are constantly clamoring for government programs to protect them. They want them to eat shit. And that's the appeal, right? It's like, no, you have to do that this is how it goes. And it's all about your outlook on life and all this. Oh, no. Stop. If you believed half of what Stoicism said that's actually a good thing, partly the things that you can't control, you would just leave those people the fuck alone. That kills me because even the ones that get a little more, libertarians that get a little more rah-rah America, like, yeah, pick yourself up by the bootstraps, blah, blah, blah. Motherfucker, 67% of the people that qualify as like the top earners in this country, okay, like your millionaires and all that, 67% of them come from inherited wealth. Talk to me about bootstraps. Give me a break. Anyway, I'm not arguing for social programs at all. I wouldn't. I'm an actual anarchist, okay? And I'm not going to argue for any government program or assistance or anything along those lines. No way. Don't confuse me. But now here's what I think is really contradictory to that notion of like not controlling. Like the idea is that there's the only things you can control is how well, you live or whatever, inside and how you react to things. That comes straight out of the Enchiridion, right? That comes straight out of Epictetus. So here, I'm going to read to you from Ryan Holiday himself. Okay. The guy who's gotten everybody else all hot and bothered. I've even heard, I forget who's it, Ben Greenfield, I think, which folks, for those that think somehow I just completely buy into whatever, I barely listen to Ben Greenfield. Okay. I don't buy into everything he says. And this is one where I completely disagree with him because he says, I heard him just say it the other day on his podcast that, oh yeah, anything Ryan Holiday comes out with, I instantly read. Well, why? But okay, here we go. Let's read something from Ryan Holiday, shall we? The Stoic way of life does not involve withdrawing from society at all, however, and it is considered unvirtuous to do so. Now, I want to stop on that for a second because I did, in fact, last year, 2019, I did an episode that was... did I title it Live Hidden? But it had to do with the concept of the Epicurean concept of living hidden, that you do pull yourself away from civilization and basically you live simply and cultivate friendships. That's Epicureanism in a nutshell. I don't know why anybody would argue or that is Epicurean hedonism. That is hedonism as Epicurus, and that is a way of achieving happiness being the ultimate goal in life. That's how you do it according to the competition to Stoicism. Who would argue against that? I can't imagine somebody who would argue against that notion. This idea of living hidden and that being in the limelight and all that does not provide happiness. I think that speaks so well to much of what's going on in the entertainment industry right now, but that's another conversation. So anyway, so Ryan Holiday is saying, yeah, this is what the Epicureans or what the hedonists would do. They'd say, yeah, pull back from society. You don't need to be known. You don't need to be involved, and just cultivate friendships and hang out, and be happy and live simply. Okay, well, what does Ryan Holiday say how we should live? So I'll start again from the beginning. I'm just going to read a paragraph here. The Stoic way of life does not involve withdrawing from society at all. However, it is considered unvirtuous to do so. The Stoics understand that we have obligations, keyword, obligations to each other, and that public life depends on participation. A Stoic is supposed to fulfill his or her role in society and accept it, even if it is a humble or stressful position. Failing to be a good citizen, Ryan Holiday, Mr. Stoic, and this is his interpretation of Stoicism, failing to be a good citizen violates one of the 4 core Stoic virtues, justice. Ooh, that sounds like social justice to me. Wonder about these Stoics. Bunch of lefties? Anyway, let's talk a little bit about this, okay? Failing to be a good citizen. I would argue that is a virtue. Today, do not be a good citizen today. Fuck that. To be a good citizen in a sick society, where is the virtue in that? Ridiculous. Anyway, so this really hits at, I want to touch on memento mori as well, but this really hints at my biggest issue, more or less, even outside of the fate thing, my biggest issue with Stoicism, and that is this very concept. Stoics understand that we have obligations to each other and that public life depends on participation. Where? What? Who? Where does this obligation come from? Could you show me on a ruler, on a measuring stick of some kind? Can you show me what is this obligation? Are we a social species? Sure. Does that, in what world does that create some form of obligations? Where do I want to now? Okay, now wait. See, here's what I was saying earlier. If you believe that everything that happens in life is leading to an ultimate good, then yes, you are obliged to engage the universe and humans, other humans and society in general, right? That I get. But then you have to accept on faith the notion that everything in the universe is happening to a good end, or to an ultimate end that is good. And we just sell that to me. Then do you actually believe that? Oh man, better not call yourself a fucking atheist for anything. Or I have so many questions if you believe that you think that the universe is always heading in a direction, that nature is always heading in a direction that is ultimately good. I have some toxic waste dumps in China or in Indonesia that I would like to show you if you want to tell me that all of this is somehow heading towards some kind of ultimate good. Oh, but you can't see, Brian, where this is all going. Well, then why should I believe it? Where is this notion of obligation to the future? I've talked about this before. You can actually find the video about it on YouTube that came from a previous Q&A where I talked about this. But this obligation towards the future, this is how we end up with governments. This is how we end up with militaries. This is how we end up with authoritarian structures, because of this, supposedly widely held belief that somehow we all have to do our part, okay, to get towards whatever this ultimate good is that nobody can fucking describe to me. I mean, the Christians do all right with it because they're like, well, going to heaven. Okay. What's that like? Fuck, I don't know. Yeah. All right. Read the last chapters of Isaiah. Go ahead and explain that to me, how that works. But whatever. No, you have no obligation to the future. No, you do not. That's outrageous. Now, it doesn't mean that the opposite, look, I mean, I've described myself as a hedonist in the past. There's plenty of things I disagree with Epicurus on, personally. Like, Epicurus doesn't think that sex is one of the necessary pleasures. I mean, I guess it's not a necessary pleasure, but so in Epicureanism, you have, like, pleasure is, Epicurus labels it, or like breaks it down to 3 types of pleasures. And he basically says you only need to go for the necessary and natural. Sex is not in the necessary and natural. It's in the unnatural. While granted, I mean, understand that, I mean, there's asexuality, right? And that is a valid and real thing. So for that kind of person, sure, sex doesn't fall under necessary and natural. But for other people that are hardwired genetically in that way, I mean, that's kind of crazy to make this carte blanche statement that it's not necessary and natural. So, I mean, there's things that I would argue with Epicurus, but also that's the thing, is Epicureanism needs to evolve to understand genetics and to understand that even though there's lots of scientific things that I think it gets completely accurate, because they were atomists, right? Which is right on. And even the argument that, I mean, Epicurus would say that there was no creation. This is why, being called an Epicurean has been such an insult for the past couple thousand years, because the idea that there is no God or no creator, is that much of the anathema, that there's no beginning to the universe. I agree with that statement by Epicurus, that there is no beginning to the universe. And I don't think there's going to be an end either. Like, I'm on board. Okay. And I think that there is math, not faith, math, science to back that up, to back up that statement. All right. There is no math or science to back up the idea that everything that happens is to lead to an ultimate good. What does good even fucking mean? But to rein it all back in. Okay. The notion that you have an obligation to society, okay, to civilization, to other people, is where everything that I thought anarchists were against comes from. That's what it outcrops from, is this notion that you have an obligation to someone else. Now, egoism would say, the fuck you do? Like, you don't have an obligation to shit. Yeah, so, I mean, these are the 2 big deals. Now, or those are kind of the 2 biggies. The idea that there is some kind of ultimate good that nature is inherently going towards, and you are a part of that. And then the idea that you have an obligation to society, to other people. No. Now why don't we take a moment, okay, to talk about memento mori, which Stoics would recommend you constantly think about every day. Always think about the fact that you one day are going to die. Always put things under the perspective that one day you are going to die. How goddamn defeatist of you. You coward. This notion that we have to die. No, I don't accept that. I don't accept that's just an axiomatic statement. That is just how it's going to be. Do I understand that, as far as we know, everybody has ever lived, to date? And yeah, sure. Okay. I get it. All right. But that does not mean that I have to die. That does not mean that I cannot take steps to, in fact, I mean, that would basically say that anybody working on life extension technology and all these other things, they are wasting their time. In fact, you could take this so far as to suggest that doctors and hospitals should not exist, because you should just fucking deal with it and know that one day you are going to die. You could take it that far, but we don't have to take it that far to knock this notion, away. All right. The very simple idea that you must accept that you are going to die. I don't know who the hell thinks that they can tell me that. And I am not crazy, nor is anybody else who's involved. People that work at the SENS Foundation, Aubrey de Grey, go down the list of them who think, no, we don't really have to die. And we can look at species. There are species on this earth right now that are effectively biologically immoral. Okay. Do they die sooner or later? Yeah, sure. I mean, like there's certain type of lobsters that are biologically immortal, starfish, there's others, but that's the point, is that no, we know scientifically that depending upon what your definitions of immortality are, we don't have to fall prey to death. That should not be seen in our mind as a foregone conclusion that is so limiting of a creature that is the human, that is so limiting of the human condition. The human condition should be seen under this perspective, that I am a unlimited person in a limited universe. That is how you should engage the world around you. That is how you should engage the universe, not memento mori. I will not accept the notion that I have to die and that I am going to die. And I'm not crazy for not accepting that, because the more we know, the more we learn, the more we research, the more we realize go ahead, read Ending Aging. And I think that Aubrey de Grey's points are spot on, where he says straight up, it's like, no, actually there's no real good reason that we do die. Like, so we don't have to. Okay, there you go. Guess what? Memento mori. Oh, bullshit. So there's three key things: the concept of fate, death, and obligation. Those are three key factors in Stoicism where they are dead wrong, even today. Even today. Yeah, they don't believe in the whole fate crap. Okay, fine. But they are also not willing to admit that everything else that they are still taking, that modern Stoics are taking from ancient Stoics, is based on the concept of fate. So it's shit. That's all I've got. That's all I can say about it, is that it is there are some good things in it. There are plenty of good things that I would mention in it, but then also those good things are often shared with the hedonists. So how about I go with the people that I agree with a whole hell of a lot more, like the hedonists? Yeah, I think I'll do that. Anyway, why don't we wrap this baby up? I've got an album of the week here, and I knew I would end up talking about that for a while. And this is a doozy. A band that I've been a big fan of for a long, long time. In fact, they just remastered their first two albums. They've only had three, and their third one just came out. But they just remastered their first two albums, which came out, I guess, in the aughts. The first one I heard was Touched by the Crimson King, which that album's actually all about the Dark Tower series by Stephen King. Really, really solid metal album, though. And it's kind of a joint operation between Blind Guardian and Iced Earth, which is, two dynamite bands. But it's Demons and Wizards is the name of the band. And I recommend all of their albums. I think all of their albums are top-notch. Touched by the Crimson King, the title track, bad fucking ass, epic as shit. But they just came out with an album called 3. And that's all that it's titled, is 3. This is another just knock it out of the park, fantastical metal album. This is pure power metal, the highest order. I love it. There's a particular, right from the first track, it starts hitting you. The one I like the most, though, there's a song Wolves in Winter about letting the beast out. Talk about being natural. I love that song. So anyway, you check out all three of their albums if you haven't. I think I did their 2019 remasters of their first two as an album of the week in 2019. Well, now we know why they remastered them, because they're getting people ready for their third album that was coming out. And boy, is it worth it. This is just some of the best metal you're going to hear in your life, in my opinion. Top-notch stuff. And 3 is, I dare say, Touched by the Crimson King was my favorite album by them, but 3 might even be after I listened to it a couple more times, I wouldn't be surprised if I come out and say that that's the best Demons and Wizards album is 3. It feels the best. It's the most consistent. I can definitely say that, but it might end up becoming my favorite. But check out the song Wolves in Winter. I love that shit. So if you're into like some great fantasy metal stuff, Demons and Wizards has your hookup. So, okay, that's it. We're going to wrap this baby up. I have talked and ranted enough for one day. So I will see all of you on the other side.